What a really special day that it is here. I do want to say a word before we jump over further into our service. Let me get over to this image called The Incredulity of Thomas by the great artist Caravaggio. Now, most churches, almost every single one of them today, is preaching a text that has done more damage. It's lectionary for today. Has done more damage to our Jewish sisters and brothers stemming from Christianity than really any other text has done. And it's from the Gospel of John. And again, it's lectionary today. So it will be read in probably, I think, 90% of Christian churches, especially that follow the lectionary, which most do, that 3-year cycle of readings. And this is how that text starts, that will be explained today, or read today without any context whatsoever. So John 20, 19 through 31. I'm just going to read the first, John 19. When it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, and the doors of the house where the disciples had met were locked for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." That line that's read today with no context whatsoever, in fear of the Jews, is the reason that we're doing services to honor and mark Yom HaShoah, for the purpose that it never happens again. And this is one of those days where I don't know if any of my colleagues out there are going to see this, but come on, colleagues. When you preach texts like this, please take people into the context of what that means. Whether it be in John, as we heard in Holy Week, all these people heard in Holy Week, the Jews said, "Crucify him." The Jews said, "Crucify him." That's what everybody hears. And you know what they remember? The Jews said, "Crucify him." I had a good friend named Mitch, who's Jewish, and a good dear friend of mine from Minneapolis, just talking to me the other day. I said, "I'm going to tell your story." He goes, I said, "You should watch." He said, "Nah." But Mitch, when I first met Mitch, funny, I met him at a Starbucks. You all get that kind of enjoyment on that one, yeah. He told me when he found out what I did, I was a pastor. He said, "Mike," he said, "the memories I have of Easter and Holy Week were running home as a kid, being chased by other kids, and they're yelling at him, 'Christ killer, Christ killer, God killer,' and they would chase him, and they'd beat him up, and he'd run home," he said, crying to his mom, and the first time it happened, he said, they're calling me God killer. What does that mean?" And his mom had to take him into the story of Holy Week, and that, must be Holy Week, where people are hearing these awful things about the Jews, and what the Jews did to those Christians that didn't actually exist at the time. Took people into the context, you'd understand that Jesus was Jewish. All the disciples were Jewish. So those hiding in an upper room in the Gospel of John were all Jewish. And if you watch, anybody watching The Chosen? Is anybody watching that? I just finished season 2 last night, and it's about Jesus, the Jesus story. I go into these stories just wanting I can't wait to tear it apart. That's why I go into them. Like, I'm going to shred this thing, I know it's going to be awful. I really enjoy this. And the reason is because it really keeps Jesus within his Judaism, the context. But it's starting to turn. I just finished season 2 last night. And when the Romans start being friendly to the Jewish people, you got a problem. And that's what's starting to happen. I'm going to keep watching it, but just when you watch that stuff, as entertaining as it can be, or when you read our Gospels, you got to just keep in mind the context of those times and the damage that can happen when we take something that is so ancient and a story from so long ago, written in a particular context, and we lift it into a Christian circle, especially in terms of the Gospels. We just need to be really careful. So, to all my colleagues out there that are interpreting text, please be responsible and do the right thing so that we don't have to ever repeat the Shoah, repeat the Holocaust. We don't have this anymore. And if you're really wondering, Christianity has its scoundrels. I mean, Martin Luther was no choir boy. Martin Luther was as anti-Semitic as they come and responsible for the deaths of so many Jewish sisters and brothers. So we just need to be really careful when it comes to religion and how we're interpreting things, because really bad things can happen. I want to recommend a couple of books. Obviously, Elie Wiesel's Night. If you haven't read Elie Wiesel's Night, please read that. Everybody should read that. It's a book that should be on everybody's bookshelf. And another one is called The Last Consolation Vanished by Jewish Polish prisoner at Auschwitz, Zelum Gradowski. And that was written while he was in Auschwitz and found later, as far as I understand it, the translation of it. And it's just gut-wrenching, absolutely gut-wrenching. So when you hear people like Glenn Beck the other night get on a radio show and say that, well, there were good Nazis. They didn't all kill Jewish people. He said it the other night, There's the doctors. You blame the doctors. Those were the really bad Nazis. Don't buy that stuff. That's why I included that hymn, Here I Am, Lord, so we can speak up and fight against that with all that we can and keep building bridges between our faiths, knowing that they're all expressions of something that we all long for, and that's just that love and beauty of God in our lives. And we just need to be really respectful. So I got to get that off my mind. I may use this text next week and think about this more this week and do a sermon on, did I just hear crickets? I just heard crickets. That was like well-timed comedy right there. I may do a sermon on this week, so sit tight with that. But Tony, that's why we want you here today. We want to start breaking down the walls of anti-Semitism, especially, that's going on right now in our culture, which is just scary. Jews will not replace us. That was uttered in Charlottesville and chanted by white men with torches, marching around. That was just a couple of years ago. The Florida Synagogue, the Florida Holocaust Museum was defaced, 2 years ago, with Nazi symbolism. So that's why we do what we do here. So we're delighted. It's my really long-winded way of saying, welcome, Tony. We're happy that you're here. Stay tuned for what could be a sermon next week. We'll see where it goes.